Welcome back, guys. This is episode number 4 of Calm India. In this episode, we will learn how to use exposure therapy and a technique called flooding to reduce anxiety. So let's get to it. Now, exposure therapy is used to tackle what is known as situational anxiety, which means that you try to identify particular triggers, some specific situations which always give you anxiety, and you use this technique to reduce anxiety just when you're in those situations. Exposure therapy uses concepts from a field called Pavlovian Conditioning, and it uses something called extinction. This is how it works. Since your brain is very good at picking out patterns, after a point of time, it adapts and sticks to particular patterns. For example, every time I meet someone new, I start feeling a little bit nervous, my heart rate starts increasing, and my palms feel sweaty. This is known as a conditioned response. Every time I meet someone, I have a particular response. The idea behind exposure therapy is to break this conditioned response and replace it with healthier patterns. Have you ever received this text which reads, "We need to talk," or "I need to tell you something"? That is hands down one of the scariest experiences over text that you can possibly have. The moment, if I get that text, I'm probably going to be imagining the worst possible conversation that I can. I had this friend in school called Tanuj. And Tanuj was so famously funny that he could just walk into a room and people would start laughing. He hasn't even said a word, but people are so used to him cracking jokes and saying crazy things that simply his presence would create the same response. I'm sure that you know certain people who, the moment you meet them, you start feeling annoyed. And there are other close friends, and the moment you meet them, without them doing or saying anything, you feel happy. You feel the same response. All of these are conditioned responses. You have a stimulus and you respond to it in the same way. For our purposes, we are going to find out what makes you really fearful and stressed out. And we are going to try to work on your conditioned response of fear and change it into a healthy pattern. Think of it this way. Imagine watching a horror movie for the first time. You feel really, really scared. After watching it 2 or 3 times, you'll start feeling a little bit less scared. By the time you watch the same horror movie, no matter how scary it is, for the 10th time, you're going to stay calm all throughout the movie. And this is the idea behind exposure therapy. For you to identify your fears and expose yourself to them so many times that by the end of it, you just stay calm no matter how anxiety inviting the situation is. So let's see how this works. There are 3 ways of doing exposure therapy. The first one is called real life exposure. As the name suggests, what you do is you actually go out in real life and face your fears one by one. And you keep increasing the intensity. Let's take my example here. So I'm a little bit afraid of meeting new people. So what I'm going to do is I'll probably go out on the road, meet one random person, and I'll have a conversation with them. It's going to be a little bit scary. It's going to make me nervous. But after I've spoken to 5 or 6 people, I'll be like, well, it's okay. I've done it a few times and I'm not really scared. And then I take it up a notch. I'm next going to approach small to medium-sized groups, say 2 to 4 people. And I'll start speaking to them. After I've done that a few times and I feel desensitized and I don't feel afraid, I'm then going to escalate it even more. Perhaps go to a public speaking event or deliver a presentation in front of my team, so on and so forth. And this is how real life exposure works. Number 2, imaginal exposure. Let's talk about your dreams for a moment. Have you noticed how, regardless of how crazy or ridiculous your dream might be, you don't actually realize that you're dreaming when you're inside it? This is because your subconscious mind cannot actually tell the difference between what is real and what is imagined. What we can do is exploit this loophole in our favor. So in imaginal exposure, all you have to do is close your eyes and visualize yourself in the same situation which really scares you or makes you anxious. You recreate that situation and you imagine yourself facing it over and over again and coming out of it with the kind of mindset that you would like to. In fact, visualization is one of the most popular techniques which sports persons use before their games. They visualize their entire game and they see themselves performing as per their goals. And this is really powerful for the same reason that I mentioned, that your brain will not be able to tell the difference. But a word of caution here, even though this is really effective, ultimately you would have to mix it up with a little bit of real life therapy, because it's no point just imagining that situation and not actually using it. Which brings us to our third way of using exposure therapy, symptom exposure. Now, this form of exposure therapy takes a slightly different approach, but it's just as effective. In case of symptom exposure, you forget about the situation itself and you focus on the physical symptoms that you feel while you're feeling anxious and stressed out. The most common symptoms include increased heart rate, sweaty palms, your face feeling hot, shortness of breath, maybe feeling a little bit dizzy. You have to identify your own set of triggers, and every single time you feel stressed out, just start focusing on your body and start focusing on what is happening to you. Over a period of time, this is going to train your brain to expect this and be comfortable with this. It's almost like a form of acceptance therapy where you start seeing that your hands are sweating now and your heart rate is increasing and you can feel your breath being short, but you tell yourself, it's alright. These are just the standard symptoms and these are going to go away in a short amount of time. And this is how symptom exposure works, and it desensitizes you to the physical symptoms themselves rather than the situation. Flooding. Now, flooding approaches the same concept of exposure, but it does so from the opposite angle. In exposure therapy, we were going from a smaller stressor to a really big and intense stressor. What flooding says is that you start training right away for this big event. For instance, if you have social anxiety, instead of approaching 2 or 3 people, you straight away train for a debate or a stand-up comedy show or any kind of public speaking. Now, the idea is that once you've trained for something like this, approaching people or any smaller challenges automatically become easier. At the end of the day, both flooding as well as exposure therapy try to achieve the same objective. You remember we spoke about the stress response, the fight or flight response, which saved your life for millions of years. So, the moment you're in that stressful situation, either you want to fight it or you want to run away really fast. Most of the times, when we are faced with uncomfortable situations, we just feel like escaping them and running away. Exposure therapy and flooding, it pushes us to do the opposite, and it makes us more comfortable with being in a stressful situation. The thing is that in the beginning, when you start doing it, a short-term stress load is going to increase. For sure, because you're literally putting yourself in more stressful situations. But over a period of time, when your mind starts getting desensitized to these situations, your overall SU load, your stress units load, is going to reduce.